Hey, DevGAMM, I'm Ash,
And I'm Billy.
and we're from Art of Play. We're a little independent game studio based in Australia and the UK. A little bit about us. We started about 12 years ago when we started working for Hasbro.com and StarWars.com, making really, really small Flash games. And then we kind of moved away from all that and begun our 70 plus game history with HTML5 and cross-browser games. And just recently, in the last couple of years, we've been working heavily on the Switch as Nintendo developers. So we have a lot of games under our belt, ranging from small to large and everything in between. And we hope today that we can impart some wisdom upon you. A little topic that we've worked up called Create a Winning Demo in as little as 30 days. Billy's going to kick us off. So over to you, man.
So, knowing your tools. So when I was a kid, the hot topic in the playground was always Nintendo versus Sega, SNES versus Mega Drive, Game Boy versus Game Gear. And as we've grown up, we're not just playing games anymore, we're making games. I still hear those same sort of discussions, but this time it's Unity versus Unreal Engine or one IDE versus another. But far more important than which tools you're using is getting to know them really, really well. Okay, so we've actually changed game engines and changed IDEs and those sort of things over the years several times. And every time you do, you get a little bit of a hump. The more games, the more demos and prototypes you build in something, the faster you'll get, the better you'll get at it. So it's really worth spending the time to learn those systems and also enabling your team to do the same. And you can do this in a bunch of ways. You can just get out there and build games. But it's also a good idea to get involved with game jams, to build side projects, prototypes. In that first slide, Ash mentioned that we've shipped around 70 games over the last 10 years. What he didn't mention is that we've probably built another 80, 100, maybe more than 100 prototypes, demos, side projects, things that got shelved or turned into other projects. So really spend some time working with your team, getting to know the insides and outsides and the nuances of all of your tools. And then we've got the tech tools on one side, but just as important, probably more important, are the communication tools. That's communication within your team, communication with externals, with investors or publishers and clients. It doesn't really matter if you're a small studio like us or a one-man band or a studio of 50 or more people. If half of your office is using Slack and half of your office is using Basecamp, and then you've got one strange guy in the corner who insists on using email, messages are going to get lost. Things are going to go astray. So nail down what tools you're going to use, get to know them really, really well. And what you'll find is that you can iterate faster, and with each project, you'll learn something that you can roll into the next one to move at a better speed. Ash?
So we're going to talk about reducing, reusing, and recycling assets. So one of the things we've become pretty good at over the years is avoiding placeholder pitfalls. And by that, I mean, not necessarily creating all of the assets you need for a working prototype straight up and from scratch. So we don't spend a lot of time doing this at the very start. What we tend to do is we try and work our way through the assets that we have already in the library. And I'll talk a little bit more about that down the line. But it's just important to know that you don't need to create assets from scratch for a demo. Often assets that you might have already can do the job just as well. So it's important that you make sure that time isn't lost initially in terms of really working on those initial placeholder assets. So what Billy and I do, and what we have done over the last decade or so, is dissecting and discussing the engines as we're building them. So what we'll tend to do is, in multiple phases during production of the prototype, we will pull apart the different components and say to ourselves, hey, we could use this in another project, or we could use this in another demo, or wouldn't this be great for a different brand that we're currently working on? So it's that constant sort of investigating of opportunities as we're working on one prototype. And what we found is sometimes another prototype will be born midway through us building the prototype we were initially focused on. So you can also wait until the end of this process and do a full dissection, but sometimes you can do it partway through. It depends on the communication lines, how open they are. So yeah, there's that middle ground dissection point where you can say, hey, this is a really great prototype, but wouldn't it also be awesome if we twisted it slightly and assigned it to another brand, or assigned it to another client? We can, modify it in certain ways. And then there's also, once you've got the full prototype ready, you can say, this worked really well, this didn't work really well. Let's catalog certain code chunks and snippets and certain visuals, because we might think that would work in a demo further down the line. So the last point to discuss here is building an organized asset library. Now, this is something that you can start from day one. And for us, it's been a decade-long process. But this comes out of the dissection process. So you might take some of the visuals and store them away because you think they'll be useful later on down the track. And the same with the code snippets. So it's building a library that is super easy for everyone in the team to access, and also helps you quite easily catalog previous prototypes and basically allow you to chop and pull elements out of that to build more content further on down the line. Billy?
Okay. The title of this slide is "Perfect is the enemy of the good," and it's a phrase I've heard lots of times. It wasn't until we started writing this talk that I actually Googled it. Apparently it dates back to Voltaire in 18th century France, which I wasn't aware of. But it really does apply to what we do. The fun things in game development are often perfecting things and polishing things and adding the visual flair and the cool sound effects and the particle effects and all those sort of things. And all of that is time which could be spent better later on in the project. Early on, if you're trying to get a demo out, demonstration, you're trying to focus on the core elements, whether that's a new gameplay mechanic or a level design or a control system. You're trying to get to a point where that demo can be used for its intended purpose, whether that's to prove a concept internally within your team that you want to run forward with something, or to present to a client or an investor to get a green light to move things forward. The demo is not a project, it's not a product, it's not a game. You need to resist the temptation early on in a project to spend too much time polishing and trying to get things perfect. And this little phrase "fail fast" is something that I think comes out of sort of Silicon Valley startup culture. You read about it in articles and in books and that sort of thing. You want to be able to fail fast. You want to be able to build a demo or a prototype and find out if it works. Sometimes we'll discuss an idea between ourselves in the team. We think, oh, that sounds like a fantastic idea. It's not until you actually get something working and you play it on a Switch or you play it on a phone or whatever your target platform is, you find, oh, that works, but that doesn't. You need to find those things that don't work as early as you can so that you're not wasting time on them. Move them to one side, or you can pivot onto something slightly different, or find the things that do work and roll those into the full demonstration to take to your investors or to take to your client. Okay, so try not to focus on the perfection early on. Try to find the things that don't work as early as you can, so it gives you more time to spend on actually turning it into a fully polished product later on.
Yeah, so I think also creative thinking plays a huge role in this prototype and demonstration phase. So the point here, slacking the creative rope, this is all about trying to understand what the creative parameters are in the demo that you're trying to make up. So where does this demo fit within the scale of creativity? A good example, there's two examples I would give. The first example would be if you are building a game for a client based on an existing IP, there's going to be parameters in place that you cannot move in terms of the visuals. So then you can shift and spend more time from the demo purpose in terms of the gameplay, perhaps even the storyline. However, if you are building something with your own IP and you've got more creative slack there, you may be focusing on more of the visuals rather than the gameplay, or a combination of both. So this is all about knowing really early on and being able to pinpoint where you're going to be focusing your strengths and where you can push the envelope and where you sort of need to toe the line with regards to the creativity. Now, we've worked on a lot of creative games with very strong licenses, and often we'll find ourselves in a situation where we know we can and can't get away with certain things with a particular brand. So that time that we would normally spend trying to figure out whether a character can do A or B is spent on mechanics and other parts of the demo that will give us a stronger outcome. So moving on to team dynamics, we have a really small team, and this is probably something that is really important to us in the sense of we encourage innovation by basically saying to the entire team, we're all involved in this together. It's a joint process, and we try to avoid pigeonholing anyone. So if our illustrators come to us and they've got an idea for the demo, we're all open for suggestions. We don't pigeonhole any of our team members. Everyone kind of works as if they're creating the game, even if they're just a small part in the process. So I think getting those team dynamics is really important in being able to turn around something really quickly and really effectively. Our team, aside from Billy and I, has really been a growing process. And it's really like a family. Even though it's so small, we kind of feel like there's always an open door to talk to each other, whether it's Messenger late at night or Basecamp during the day. We make sure that everyone feels like they're part of the process. I think that's really super important. The last point here is the agility within your creative capacity. Now, the fast iteration and agile working environment is sort of something that seems to be more noticeable now thanks to COVID. But basically, setting up your studio in a way that everyone works to their best abilities, and that might not necessarily mean traditional work times, and certainly anymore not traditional working places. So our team has always been split all over the world. Billy and I have always had a dynamic relationship, and I think a lot of that has had to do with time zones and things like that, where he'll often be crafting things while I'm asleep, and then as soon as I wake up, I'll be crafting things while he's asleep, and it's sort of this process that's been rolling and rolling and rolling. But even that aside, learning if your staff, if your team members produce better content at night or at day, or what sort of working arrangements they prefer to generate the best possible outcome. I think these are all super important, and they've been hugely important for us in being able to turn around not only working demos within a short period of time, but in the entire gaming process. So yeah, that's the creative side of things. Over to you, Billy.
Okay, so this final main slide kind of expands on several things that we've said already, and it's focused about keeping it small, both when you're building a demo or a prototype, keeping the concept and the scope small, and also in a second I'll talk about keeping the team small, which Ash has already focused on. So in the previous slide that I was talking about, I said that a demo is not a full product, and it's really important that you try and resist the urge to put everything into your demo. You're trying to put the things into the demo which are the things that the unknowns, the things that you don't know are going to work. Like I said, whether that's a control system or new camera movement. It's the things that ideas that you've come up with that maybe they sound good on paper, but you haven't fleshed them out, you haven't tried them in a previous game. Okay, so focus on the things that are going to get you towards that goal, whether it's trying to nail down something that you want to run with yourself for an internal project, or if you want to try and impress a client or an investor. You're trying to just trying to focus on the one thing that gets you to that point, and not trying to be a jack of all trades and doing absolutely everything. Trying to nail down that mechanic. So that focus on the scope of the project itself. But as Ash was just talking about, we're a small team. We've grown and shrunk several times over the years. We've nestled on this team size of about half a dozen core people that just really works, and we found that it works for several reasons. A smaller team avoids a lot of red tape. As Ash was just talking about, we have an idea, he can work on a concept while I'm sleeping and vice versa. We don't have to go through layers of management and get things down on paper and get them agreed by lots of people. If we get an idea that works, one of us can just run off and assign it to a team member and get it done. And the other part of being a small team is, by their very nature, everyone has to wear multiple hats, which can be a real advantage. It's a bit of a jack of all trades situation. So personally, I'm a coder. That's my core capability. I have a certain amount of graphics ability. Ash, as a creative visual person, he can still do a little bit of the code. And everyone in our team does a bit of that. By the nature of a small team, everyone has to do a little bit of everything. And what that does is it helps us communicate with each other. If you're a coder who only codes and you only ever get to see assets that are brought to you by an artist, you don't understand how those assets were created. You can't modify them yourselves. And when you're talking to each other, there can be barriers in the way. So I would encourage everyone, if you're someone small in a small team, or if you're joining a bigger team, try and learn some of the skills that are in the industry that are outside of your niche. And similarly, if you're bringing people into your team, enable them to do the same. Basically, try and get people to learn as much as you can, and you'll find that the process moves a lot quicker, you communicate better, and you can iterate faster, which is what this talk's all been about. It's about trying to focus on the things that get you from zero, get you from a concept to a working demo to a prototype and onto a greenlit project as quickly and efficiently as possible. There's a joke that probably everyone's heard, which is, you hear it within this industry every now and then, that a project manager is someone who thinks that a baby can be delivered by 9 women in 1 month. We all know that just throwing man hours at something, adding more people to a team, is not always the way forwards, which is why really small teams, certainly for us, the way that we work seems to work really, really well.
Yeah, so once you move out of the team component, it's good to focus on expectations, and in particular the client expectations. Now, the client could be an existing client, like an agency or a company that's requested you to make them a game, or it could be just yourself if you're creating your own internal content. So the most important thing we found from the very beginning is set the deadline. Now, this is more important, I think, if you're working with your own IP, but definitely still important if you're working on a game that has been requested for you to make. So we will set the deadline quite early on, and we will stick to that like glue. And that moves everyone forward at a pace that we've become used to. So it also helps sort of reduce feature creep and set the expectations with the client that if we're turning around a deadline in, not turning around a project within, or a prototype within a certain amount of time, it helps then the client say, well, these guys are going to be at it for 2 weeks and we're only going to see what they could have done in 2 weeks. So it sort of manages that expectation right from the very beginning, and it helps everyone have a clear vision moving forward of what they're going to produce within that time frame. So it's super important when you're discussing things with the client or with your team early on to say, this is the time frame we're working to, and we're going to stick with it, because it's really easy to slip off the tracks when you want to get something done if that isn't in concrete. Part of this whole process is also defining the ins and outs. What's going to be in the demo and what isn't, and making that crystal clear to everyone involved, including the clients, including the team members, and working on what supplementary information you're going to need to give to back up this prototype with all the stuff you've taken out. So you might be focusing on the gameplay mechanic rather than the artwork. So the gameplay mechanic could be super simple, just using really basic shapes, and then you would use some concept art on the side to show, hey, this is what the visuals look like, rather than trying to put all the visuals into the game as we discussed earlier on in the presentation. So it's that picking what you're going to focus on, and then figuring out how you can supplement anything you foresee as a gap in that prototype with other mediums. And it could be a little bit of animation you've done on the side, could be some artwork, could be some audio stuff that would really help draw that bigger picture for either your internal team or for the client. So yeah, so filling in the gaps is basically that. What you want to do is communicate well within your team and to the client as to what the demo is going to focus on, and what elements you are going to bring into that to supplement if you'll foresee any major gaps. So it's about bringing together a full package, even though certain key areas are going to be lacking, and then backing that up with additional communication, whether it be additional art or anything like that, to basically round it out and make sure that everyone is crystal clear in what you're developing. Billy?
That's it. We're on to the final slide. So thanks for listening, guys. We've been Art of Play. If you want to find out any more about us, then www.artofplaygames.com, or you can always drop us an email at studio@artofplaygames.com. Ash, have you got anything that you wanted to wrap up with?
No, I just appreciate everyone's time. I know it's been a difficult year, so hopefully this will help everyone locked in their respective studios making some awesome games. So really appreciate everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Hey, so thank you for your talk, Billy and Ash. Actually, things that you were talking about were quite close to myself because I'm leading a small studio as well. And we use in our work like many of your ideas. By the way, what is the size of your team?
So currently we're only 6 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many people works on the same project or demo at the same time, and how many projects do you work on in parallel usually?
So usually we have around 4 people most of the time. And we have anywhere between 4 and 6 projects on the go at any one time. 2 of those are usually internal, our own IP, and then we usually have 2 or 3 external client projects happening at the same time. It has been more in the past. We've sort of dialed things back a little bit because we wanted to focus more on our own games.
Okay.
So in 2018, we usually had about 6 games on the go at any one time. So yeah, it was quite intense.
Okay. What kind of games usually? What's your typical project?
So a typical project would be a cross-browser HTML5 type game. We've produced roughly somewhere between 60 to 70 of those for Nickelodeon and other clients over the course of the last 5-6 years. Internally, though, we're working on Switch titles at the moment, so Nintendo titles.
Okay. I have 2 questions from audience. The first one is how to focus on the result if your team is a team of 15 people?
Wow. Okay. Billy, have you got any ideas on that one?
Well, as we're talking about in the talk, we scale our team back a certain amount because we've found that a smaller team allows us a bit less red tape, especially when we're doing it with clients. It's a little bit different if you're working on internal projects. But with client work, we found that the smaller team you can iterate a bit faster. So, I guess for that sort of size, maybe it depends on the size of the project. Maybe you split the team up into smaller units while you're working at the demo stage, and they get together a bit further on.
Yeah, definitely breaking the team size down into smaller portions to be able to better focus on delivering the demo is a good idea. I mean, our team expanded to roughly 15 people back in 2017 when we were producing far more commercial content. And when we were that large, we were splitting up into smaller teams to work on specific projects and specific demos for clients. So that enabled us to focus more on smaller objectives a lot easier. So I guess you do reach a point in your team size where you can say there's too many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak, and we need to shrink the people involved down to a certain number. And that's going to change from studio to studio as well. I mean, for us, like Billy said, it's that 5 to 6 person mark, but it could actually be bigger. It depends on the project, really.
Thank you. Another question: what is the difference between a demo and a playable teaser?
Polish. A playable teaser would mean you are building a game for a larger audience. I think a demo would be a game that you are building for a very specific number of people. So it might be if you're building a demo for a client or you're building a demo for internal purposes, it's really easy to identify your client and their needs and their sort of expectations. And if you're doing it as an internal game, likewise, it's very easy to really scope out what those expectations are within your own team and set goals accordingly. With a teaser, you are essentially trying to win more people over with that game. So it would have to be more polished. The placeholder assets and things like that would need to be a little bit more processed to sort of engage people and bring them into your project and make them want to be a part of it. You know, if it's a Kickstarter project or if it's a game that you're trying to get specific funding from a large group of people and you think a teaser is going to work, then that's the difference, I would say. So it comes down to the audience that you're trying to reach. I would class a demo as if I was to build a demo for a client, it would be only to show to maybe 1 to 2 people within that particular organization. And when you're doing that, you can show them lots of different things and get your idea across in a whole bunch of different ways that aren't necessarily related to the game specifically. So you could say, well, we want to go with this particular character and animate it this particular way. And you would maybe show them some storyboards. But a game teaser in of itself would probably need to have more of that in the actual teaser. So it would be a little bit more filled up a little bit more, if that makes sense.
You should probably just say that for the purposes of our talk, we're talking about demo in terms of attracting clients or proving a concept to a client or an investor, not a demo that would be released to players ahead of selling a full game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we would never put a demo on YouTube, for example, but you would put a teaser, game capture from a teaser or something on YouTube. So it's more of a public domain sort of thing. Is that what you're thinking, Billy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, guys, for sharing your.
Thank you.